JB Knowledge Podcast Network.
On episode 89
Of the Insurtech Geek Podcast, talking about AI-powered business process intelligence with Jay Bartot from ZeitWorks. The Insurtech Geek Podcast, powered by JB Knowledge, is all about technology that's transforming and disrupting the insurance world. We'll be interviewing guests and doing deep dives into specific tech we see changing the industry. We're taking you on a journey through insurance tech, so enjoy the ride and geek out. Before we get started with our interview, don't forget that you can subscribe to the Insurtech Geek Podcast by texting Geek Out to 66866. Make sure you never miss an episode. Now to our special guest, Jay Bartot from ZeitWorks. Jay, how's it going?
Good. How are you guys?
Man, I cannot complain. Glad to have you on the show. Rob Galbraith, how's it going?
It's going, James. It's going. It is almost summertime. It's my daughter's last week of school this week as we're recording, so...
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. As we record this, it's Tuesday, May 23rd, 2022. My kids are in their last week of school as well. It is summertime in beautiful Texas, and it's been blazing hot. It's been like 98 degrees every day. We finally got a cold front came through. It feels a little bit more like May. Jay, where are you at?
I am in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle. And I tell you, it's been very cold and rainy here all spring. We had a couple of nice days over the weekend, so we're super happy for that.
Yeah, it's been literally just nasty hot here. So enjoy your weather that you got up there, and we're glad, of course, it's usually a little cooler up there in the Pacific Northwest. Jay, we're glad to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You've got experience across a broad variety of different companies and across the industry of software development, whether it was for, you actually spread it around for a while. We're going to talk about all these, including stops at Hulu, Microsoft. You really had quite the array of companies that you have been able to work at since '93. But I like to talk about you. Let's talk about your background just a little bit. Where were you born and raised? Where'd you go to grade school, high school? What'd you dream of doing when you were a kid?
Yeah, so I was born in Greenwich, Connecticut, in New England, and was there in Connecticut until I was about 9 or 10, and then my family moved to Chicago, inner city Chicago. My parents went to work for the University of Chicago, and grew up there. The rest of my growing up there. Went to school, a few different colleges, but ultimately, ended up at the University of Iowa. And then, this was the early to mid 90s, and the whole grunge thing was happening out in Seattle. And so all the Midwest kids were moving out to the Pacific Northwest. And so me and some friends, packed up our stuff and moved on out.
Now, what made you? This is a great combo because I'm obsessed with music as well. I play piano, guitar, sing.
Yeah.
Grew up in that in South Louisiana. Was obsessed with grunge music in the 90s as well. But what made you triple major music, anthropology, and computer science at University of Iowa?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I wanted to be a professional musician. I played drums, I played guitar, was really obsessed with music. And so my first stop at college, my freshman year, was at Berklee College of Music in Boston. And what I learned there, a very valuable life lesson, is being a professional musician is a hard living. And after a year of doing that and kind of realizing what my competition was like and just kind of how hard it was to make a living and make a buck, I went back to Chicago and kind of regrouped. There's a social scientist in me somewhere, from my mother in particular, who is a PhD in sociology and studied and taught at University of Chicago. So I started thinking about some kind of new things there in social science and anthropology, but the music stayed with me, and I couldn't get away from wanting to play, wanting to record, and wanting to compose. And so when I got to the University of Iowa, I met a friend who said, I was doing music production on kind of cheap 4-track recorders, and the quality was pretty poor. And he had this personal computer. He had this early Macintosh computer that he was doing MIDI music development on. And he said, if you go down to the computer center here at school, they'll lend you the money to buy a computer. And I was like, someone's going to lend me money? Are you kidding me? And so I went down and picked out a Macintosh. This was the late 80s. And brought it back to my room and started doing music production on it, and got obsessed with it. It was the ultimate instrument. I could draw on it. I could play music on it. I could do my homework on it. I mean, you name it. I was really obsessed with it. And, gosh, I wasn't a math kid in high school, but I had some math, kind of geeky friends who had Commodore 64s and some of these earlier systems. And somehow I crossed some kind of bridge and got interested in programming and started to teach myself how to program.
Now, which Mac was this? The Macintosh Plus, or was this
Yes.
like?
It was a Macintosh SE, which was the model that came right after the Plus.
That was right after the Plus. Yeah, it had two floppy drives
That's right.
instead of
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So you like me, because I was like obsessed with piano and thought I was going to be a professional piano player. And then I found out how much money they made, and I was like, eh. And then I got hooked on coding, and I was like, a lot of musicians are coders, because it's music's coding. I mean, right?
Totally.
Like music, I would argue, is the world's first universal programming language, because you could plug the same code into every computer, the computer being the piano or the guitar, and you'd get the same result, or roughly the same result.
Yeah.
It just makes so much sense once you get into it, right?
Absolutely. And the ability with the newer software tools to edit what you've composed at a fine grained level. I got a bad note in that recording, so I'm going to go into my screen and editor and just kind of move that note right over to where it's not a wrong note anymore. Super powerful. And again, I got just really obsessed with the whole thing.
Awesome. So you've spent, and I'm going to fast forward because I want to jump in and talk about insurance and Insurtech, and we could talk for an hour on your resume. But you've had a lot of different roles at a lot of different companies. One of them was acquired. You were CTO and co-founder of Vodo, which was acquired by Hulu, and I've been a longtime Hulu customer. So but you started in software industry. It's always been in software, technology development, CTO, managing director. Now you've been board member and advisor. Tell me what was the path there? Like, were you just always really interested in writing code, and it didn't matter which industry?
It wasn't just code, and it didn't matter what industry. I got interested in two things in the late 90s: startups and machine learning and AI. I got introduced to those things through some faculty at University of Washington I was working with on one of their startups. Some faculty was doing some spin outs of their research into the private sector, and got really interested in pattern recognition and data and all these things I probably would have laughed at myself at 10 years earlier, being interested in this kind of stuff. But once I was on that startup path and that machine learning path, I ended up, going through a number of different verticals like e-commerce and online advertising, travel, medical informatics, consumer shot video. All of those things have interesting data and machine learning problems associated with it. So my thing is like creating these vertical machine learning products that take in some kind of interesting proprietary source of data, pull some signals out of it, and pass the value on to the customer.
Awesome. And let's fast forward then. Is ZeitWorks your first foray into insurance technology?
Almost. So after I sold my last startup to Hulu and worked at Hulu for a bit, I took an interesting job that kind of reflected my background to some degree. I took up a job as CTO and managing director at a startup studio. Basically, we were a small group of people in Seattle who our job was to come up with new, interesting, venture-backable technology startup ideas. And so we looked quite a bit at the insurance space, looking for new opportunities, new products that were needed, new technology that was needed, and so forth. So that's kind of the first time I started to learn a bit about insurance and Insurtech. That was also the place where, looking at the RPA space, we came up with the idea for ZeitWorks.
You had the opportunity with ZeitWorks to take these set of tools that you described to me as upstream of RPA and apply them to any industry. So why'd you pick FinTech and Insurtech to be the first foray with ZeitWorks?
Yeah, so the interesting thing, the nice thing about ZeitWorks is that our total addressable market is massive, right? I mean, repetitive business processes executed by teams of people are found in so many industries: financial services, insurance, healthcare, manufacturing. I mean, you name it. So that's good from a total addressable market space. As a young little startup, we have to focus. We don't want to boil the ocean. And so financial services and insurance were particularly interesting to us. We chose FinTech and Insurtech on the bet that because we're a little startup, we got to move pretty quickly. And so when we engage customers, ideally, it's a few months of getting in there, showing our value proposition and getting them onboarded as customers. Whereas a lot of the other industries I mentioned, the sales cycle can be really long. And long sales cycles kill startups. And so, that's kind of why we've been focused on, the Insurtechs and FinTechs. In order to hopefully move a little quicker, also be working with folks that maybe might be a little bit more versed in the value of data and how to work with data, to optimize their businesses and, make more analytical decisions about how to run their businesses and make them more efficient.
Awesome. So in a short, sweet, simple nutshell, what does ZeitWorks actually do and how is it different than RPA?
So what we discovered from looking at RPA was before you can implement an RPA bot, you have to know what your process is. You have to understand it. You have to know what the steps are in the process. Is the process ready for RPA? Does it need to be re-engineered? Does it need to be optimized? And what we found was that although there was a big RPA boom happening at the time we started looking at the space in 2019, when we talked with a lot of customers in the spaces I mentioned, what we heard was, I've heard about RPA, I've heard about it from my colleagues, I've heard about it at the conferences. We're not ready for RPA. We got to figure out what's happening in our own group of people. I'm not sure what my people do. I'm not sure what processes they follow. I'm not sure what steps they follow. I'm not sure who's a good worker and a not so good worker. I'm not sure who needs help, et cetera, et cetera. And so we realized we needed to meet organizations where they are versus where they want to be, at some point in the future. And that means, shining a light on their organizations and their processes, and helping them see what's going on so they can fix it and make it better.
I'm really interested in this, Jay, because I've worked with RPA both at a couple different carriers that I've worked for in the past, and the promise is great. And to your point, we've got tons of workflows, some of which are automated, many of which are not, right? Manual processes, and I think the pandemic has shed a light on a lot of the manual parts for insurance companies. I also know I've worked with people that are RPA developers, and you never seem like you get the ROI that you would think you would. And there's many different reasons for that. But, oftentimes maybe, you've got to get information from an external website or database, and you go out and you're scraping, you're having automated login, and you're going here and there and getting the information. And then all of a sudden they change their system, right? And it's like, okay, now you got to go back to your RPA breaks, and now you got to, and it feels like we were constantly kind of re-engineering the RPA. And then, you mentioned something I describe as the gate agent problem, right? Which is if you've been to the airport and you talk to a gate agent and you see them fly through their green screens and you're like, how can they still use that? And it's like, well, to them, they've been using it for decades and they know the system backwards and forwards. So asking them, like, how can you improve upon this process? They're going to think about that system, right? And they may be like, well, I have to enter this information in 3 different places. It'd be nice if it was one, but they won't think big enough, right? It's always about kind of the adjacent possible. I know there's firms like UiPath that do process mining and others. You've talked about ZeitWorks being a process fitness tracker. So tell me a little bit about how that works, where you're able to actually uncover what people do without them having to sit down and kind of interview them for hours about what they do.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that was really the sort of initial problem we saw when we heard from management consulting firms in particular who work with RPA vendors that in order, as a pre-step to RPA, they would need to sit down with their clients and do this manual process discovery and run these workshops where they would bring in gaggles of fresh college grads and have these kids stand over the shoulders of the workers, doing the repetitive business processes and writing everything down manually. And that was time consuming, it was expensive. And at the end of that exercise really only revealed a single point in time analysis. Processes are always changing, people are always changing. And so we knew we needed a system that could, a sensor, if you will, in our case, a software sensor, but conceptually certainly similar to a hardware sensor that, you guys are starting to see in the insurance business. People putting sensors in their homes and so forth and trying to notice and predict water damage and other things that can happen. In our case, we wanted to build a software sensor that would sit on the desktop machines of the information workers and passively monitor all of the interactions that they have with the user interface that made up their business process. So what applications did they interact with? In what order? How long would they spend in those applications? What would they do in those applications? And by being able to gather that data, suddenly, you can start to see things that you may never have thought of before. We've had customers who have said, some of this stuff, you're validating my hunches that I've had for years. We've had those same customers have also said to us, hey, I had no idea this was going on. I didn't know people were doing this or not doing this. And so, one of our mottos is you can't fix what you can't see. And so with data, suddenly, and some analysis on top of that data, suddenly you can see what's going on. In a very similar way to all of us who are, with our Apple Watches and our Fitbits and all of this, other sensor software we're starting to wear, suddenly you've got the data. How many steps did I take today? How much weight did I lose? And once you have real data, I think we all know that you can make a lot better strategic decisions about where you want to go.
Let's try to understand the technical aspect of how this works. You install a desktop agent on the worker's desktop that then logs all activity and what they're doing on each application, so you can build real-time process documentation of how each worker does each major process flow.
That's right.
And then does it reflect itself in some kind of graphical map that it produces saying, hey, they spend this much time over here and this much time over here, and then they're exporting from here and then uploading to
we
here?
Have an analytics portal where right now managers can log on and look at their processes, look at the behavior of their teams, look at how application usage in particular is being utilized across different parts of their processes, see all of this data analytically, and where necessary, not only see the data analytically in charts and graphs, but be able to drill into where they see strange things or anomalies or outliers. And be able to poke around and say, this is interesting. My processes on average tend to take an hour to complete, but I see this distribution in this long tail of these other processes, that take 12 hours. What's going on here? Is there an issue with the information worker? Is there issues with the software? Do people need more training? Is this particular customer whose data we're processing, are they problematic? We have one customer who, when we started showing them their data, started to tell us about how they're a financial services processing customer, and they started to tell us about how they've got customers that they think are not good customers for them because they're not profitable. their processes that they have to execute on behalf of those customers are too complex. Alternatively, they need to change their pricing scheme to represent the complexity of certain customers' processes. So that was really interesting to us because we knew that, a lot of these processes are broken. We knew that a lot of these information workers may need better training. They may need better design processes, these kinds of things. But we hadn't thought about the end customer of our customers and whether, those customers were necessarily good customers or bad customers. So, during our beta period, our pilot period, we've learned about all kinds of new use cases, that our data uncovers that people hadn't thought of before.
I got to ask the obvious question. Are you big
It's
brother?
a great question. And it's a deep question. We are certainly sensitive to this topic of surveillance. And, one of the things that we think is really important is that if you're going to be measured by something or someone, then you should be able to get value out of that measurement yourself personally. And so, from a go-to-market standpoint, we focused on selling into managers and then their bosses, which are typically CIOs or CROs or so forth. But we've realized that if the whole team can be involved in the value of ZeitWorks, both getting value out of ZeitWorks and contributing to the value of ZeitWorks, then the whole system is going to be better. So we really want our customers to be transparent, that there's a sensor running, but also give the information workers a login to our system where they can see their own metrics and they can see their own steps and use our tools to figure out where they're having problems or debug their problems and be a part of that whole ecosystem. So we feel pretty strongly about that. And the first rev of features were for managers, but now we're starting to focus on features for workers too.
Yeah, I just wanted to go a little deeper on that particular topic, Jay, because I know, I've managed teams of underwriters in the past that are handling individual accounts, right? And they have essentially productivity stats and quality stats. So we want you to handle a certain number of files with a certain percent of accuracy. And, we had processes where we could, see their screen, we could listen to phone calls that they were having, et cetera, right? That was part of the quality audit and evaluation process. And, it just drove conversations, right? So you'd see somebody that maybe did a really good job with quality, but they struggled to make their productivity goals. And so you'd want to work with that person to be like, hey, I don't want you to sacrifice quality, but I do want to make sure that you're hitting, the productivity number, because that's going to help you in your career in advance. And you could see people that were super talented, but it's like, okay, but if you're not mastering your current role, then it's really hard to kind of, have you advance in the organization and make that case. There's a lot of other people that are competing for those types of promotions. I was just wondering, like, have you seen or heard any of these kind of conversations as managers and workers are talking, and does it help maybe go beyond the tunnel vision of the gate agent problem that I saw, where it's hard for them to think beyond their current processes or systems to a more holistic conversation and lead to better outcomes on both sides?
Yeah, I mean, with our handful of pilot customers we've had so far, we haven't seen a lot of that detail about, for example, as you say, how would ZeitWorks data be used in an exact conversation, with an information worker, to help them improve. I think we only sort of know by instinct and analogy that when a worker is armed with information, no matter what kind of worker they are, they're more in a position to advocate for themselves. One thing that we hear a lot about is, well, I do a really good job, and at promotion time, I have data to back up the fact that, I do a certain amount of work that, yields a percentage of the teamwork that we need to accomplish in this quarter, or those kinds of things. So I think it can be information that's used to help a worker that may be struggling. And again, we don't have a lot of experience yet with those scenarios, but we're also hearing about scenarios where workers will tell us, this is great because this is sort of proof that I do my job well. So a lot more to be learned here, Rob. I think, for better or for worse, with a lot of the technology startups I've done, we're kind of walking the cutting edge of, data and information and how to use that information responsibly and productively versus it. We know there's possibilities for this information to not be used responsibly and productively. And so, we're looking forward to working with our customers on these issues and helping them, articulate the value to, their team as well as to, up their chain of management.
Okay, so let's talk about how you said it's upstream
Yes.
from RPA. So let's talk about how far upstream, because it would seem to me like the next logical thing would be to automatically build an RPA bot from a process that you recorded, almost like recording an Excel macro. And I'm really sorry if I'm oversimplifying this, but it would seem to me like that might be a next step, right?
And as I mentioned earlier, we started out thinking that what was really needed was a way to automate what's oftentimes called task discovery, so that you can understand, well, what are the steps I'm going to need to teach my bot in order to do this process. And then, as I mentioned, we realized there was this sort of bigger problem of help me manage my team, help me understand, where we are and how to optimize things prior to RPA. But it's logical to think, okay, well, there'll be a time where ZeitWorks helps a team get their house in order and figure out their processes and understand how well engineered they are and whether they're good candidates for RPA. And at that point, we have all the data. We can certainly output a process map or a task map, if you will, that would be instructional either to automatically create an RPA bot or probably more likely instructions to give an RPA engineer to go and implement, a bot. One of the metrics we compute is a complexity score on a process, and not all executions of one particular process are the same. So someone may be processing bank loans, and James, maybe your bank loan application is not so complicated, but Rob's is more complicated for whatever reason. And so it's not a one size fits all when it comes to these processes, and being able to observe a whole distribution of process executions, say in this case, a bank loan process, really tells a much greater story of how complicated do these things get. And, given that and where there's complications, what is the most appropriate use of RPA technology? Can we segment executions of this bank loan process or claims process in insurance, in order to automate the ones we can automate, but also know that, we've got real people with their hands on the wheel for the more complex ones.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's of course, we've done a lot of RPA work. RPA is one potential outcome, but another potential outcome is just literally consulting with the worker and saying, hey, we've got to rethink and re-engineer this process, right? Like, so, but part of the outcome, I'm just trying to get to like what you do with all this, right? Like you either build an RPA bot or you re-engineer the process with a process engineer, right? I mean, what are all the outcomes?
I think training is a big deal. I think that, with this type of information worker, we know that attrition has always been a problem. Institutional amnesia is typical, where the best person leaves. They knew where all the bodies were buried in the nooks and crannies of the different applications and systems. Suddenly there's no documentation, and the person who is second in command knows a lot less than the person who left. And so I think documentation is a big area. We're also, we started ZeitWorks, of course, before the whole COVID thing. And the surge in remote work, we're also seeing a lot of people ask for like workplace analytics features. So, since people are not in the office, it's hard to know, who's doing well, who's struggling, who's working not enough, but even probably more likely, who's working too much. And again, that data can be really hard to get your hands on. So we've been adding features that probably belong more in the workplace analytics sphere of how much are people working, what's their quality of life, how can we keep tabs on them so that we can check in with them and say, geez, I saw you work 60 hours last week. We had a big deadline to hit, but we can actually see who it impacted and how it impacted them. So all of these kinds of features that this data powers are kind of coming together in, yes, still with one foot in the whole automation RPA world, but another foot squarely in the help the team be better, help the team survive under the remote work circumstances, and maximize the human potential of the team.
Yeah. So I've got a friend that that's in that space with an app called Time Doctor, and they record everything going on the desktop, and they really drive it towards timesheets and productivity reporting.
Yeah.
They don't get into process mapping like this. Are you going to step into the Are you going to step into the timesheets and that side? I don't see it on your website, but are timesheets and productivity reports
it's hard
part
to know.
of this eventually?
We'll go in the direction our customers want us to go. Of course, we have to stick to our guns too. It's always a challenge for a young startup, where a big customer might come along and say, geez, we really want you to do this, and the startup is kind of like, well, you want us to do that, but everyone else wants us to do this other thing here. So it's always a challenge to stick to one's guns. But I think with the way the work is changing and the whole kind of future of work thing that we're figuring out as a society, and within corporate cultures, I think there's likely to be new things that will end up building that, frankly, we wouldn't have thought of a couple of years ago, because, the needs and requirements are changing.
Yeah, Jay, just curious, kind of wrapping up our conversation, like, who should be reaching out to you and when? And I'm thinking specifically, in a past life, our company was setting up an automation center of excellence and, talking to a lot of these RPA vendors and whatnot. But it feels like, man, if I had known ZeitWorks was around, like you guys would have been a first stop, I guess, on that kind of automated center of excellence journey, just to kind of get a lay of the landscape, right, and help inform a lot of the decisions subsequently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think most companies, I think, probably have processes that would be good to know more about, and teams and execution that would good to be know more about before you RPA. Before you automate. And so certainly encourage people to talk with us. I mentioned consultants earlier, and, consultants obviously play a huge role, and not only in business processes and business processes analysis and modeling, but also automation. And so, we see that as a big place for us too, to work with consultants who are on the ground, talking with customers, understanding their businesses and the nuances of their businesses and processes, and using ZeitWorks to give them that critical near real-time data that they need to move quickly and make the right decisions.
Rob, thank you, Jay. And Rob, you had another question I thought was really interesting around incremental innovation.
Yeah, just it ties a little bit to what I mentioned, before about people having a hard time to think about processes independent of systems. And so I'm just thinking that, so Jay, we've talked a little bit about the worker conversation before. An analogy I would use is wearables, right? So I've seen wearables companies where they use wearables in the workplace, and there's definitely this concern about a big brother, or are you watching me, right? But I've also saw this, hey, we're using this to make a safer workplace. And if we notice that there was a unexpected slip or whatever, we may come ask you about that as a safety manager. And maybe you just stumbled, but maybe, there's a slick spot on the floor, we need some protective matting there or whatnot, right? And I think it's, kind of what you alluded to earlier. So yeah, just kind of, can you help companies go beyond kind of, hey, we've got a 5-step process and we want to make it a 4 or 3-step, and maybe go beyond that incrementalism to really totally rethink their processes? of what they could be?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a place where working with other folks in the ecosystem, like a business process analyst or a business process modeler, who would be able to take our data and really start to think creatively, based upon what they see, what should those processes be. So I think that that's a big thing. We also recognize that. We need to, one place where we need to continue to move forward with our product and innovate is helping organizations quantify the improvements that are being made. It's one thing to show somebody a bunch of data and analytics, and they're like, oh, that's great, I didn't know that. It's good to know these things, or I'm going to make a few changes here or a few changes there. But ultimately that stuff will start to wear thin if there aren't more mechanical things around, to help the organization's tools, to set goals and to make improvements. And so to that end, we're launching a goals feature later this month, where based upon a number of the analytics that we provide, individuals or managers, can set goals. We spent an average of 15 minutes in this process. Let's see if we can get that down to 10 minutes, set the goal, have it be set for the whole team or some particular team members, and then track that progress longitudinally. So a month from now, I know, like, well, we haven't improved here, or 3 months from now, we have improved here due to these changes. So we recognize that we can't just give away data and analytics. We have to also develop tools, that help all those little incremental changes that will probably happen across the people and the processes and the applications, and show that they add up and that the sum is greater than the parts.
That's awesome. That's a good discussion. So I'll finish out with this. What's long term? Because you've just described everything that you're already doing, right? So what's on the horizon?
A lot of things on the horizon. One of the things that, interestingly enough, I think that is probably on the horizon for us is that, in some sense, all roads do lead back to automation. And so, we see some processes where there are parts to it where you need a human. They're looking at a Word doc. They're interpreting some unstructured text as an important step in that process, and using their heads to figure out, okay, what do I do next? Oftentimes there's other parts of the same process that are highly repetitive. For example, copying and pasting values from, a web screen into an Excel spreadsheet. Of course, Excel spreadsheets are ubiquitous. They're the glue that holds together the pieces, oftentimes, between all these different processes. And so we recognize that the idea of, I'll call them micro automations, pieces of the automation of the process that can be automated, for an information worker, and pieces of the process that just need to be done by the worker. So the analogy I use a lot for this is autonomous driving. I think we maybe were led to believe that autonomous driving would be, ubiquitous and powerful by now. I can tell you as a Tesla owner, it's not. It works great on the highway, but when you get into the city, man, you better have your hands on the wheel. And so I think the same thing is true here. We're obsessed with thinking that AI is going to replace things and take over things, when in fact, I think a much better role for AI and machine learning is in an assistive or augmentative role, where it's helping you along and doing those, in this case, very repetitive parts. But in other parts, it's backing off and letting the human do what the human does well.
Yeah. I was watching an interesting special on Hulu about Tesla and self-driving, and of course it recapped all the times that Elon said that full self-driving would be fully automated and fully capable, and by what date. And they said, and they missed that one, and they missed that one, and they missed that one, and then they had a major accident. I mean, because some problems really are actually monumentous. And I find it interesting, by the way, on that one, that that he was able to figure out how to land 2 rockets simultaneously, autonomously, before he was able to figure out how to get a car to drive in the city. Like, isn't that amazing? I mean, just to show you how complicated some problems really are.
Yeah. And me, me being a machine
really
learning
simple,
geek, I was kind of a sucker and, fell in for the big sell, but I can tell you there's some work to do there still.
Yeah. My GM Super Cruise on my Cadillac, it's nice. They definitely undersold it and it underdelivered, so it was, but it does it'll at least get me to Houston on the highway on its own, which is nice. It saves me a lot of hassle, so it's worth it. And they undersold it, so I was okay. I was like, okay, well, you undersold and underdelivered, so it's fine.
That's a great anecdote. I mean, it's helping, right? And so it's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, it helps me. Yeah, I got it, and I think that just like Excel macros helped me, just like. We built our own internal process documentation system. It doesn't automatically document the process control. I got to tell you, I have like 3 processes I want to fetch ZeitWorks on inside my own company right now, because I've got 270 employees, some of whom do a lot, manual processing for our clients. And I'm like, there's something to that, because we have our own process management system. And so, it's there's a difference between process documentation, process management, and actually self-documenting and that's actually probably what excites me the most is I would consider this, and I consider RPA a bridge technology. I don't consider it an end state. I think APIs are end state, whereas I think RPA is a bridge to API, and this is both a bridge and end state, because you'll always have people doing things, right? So you're trying to bridge them through to an automated future, but as soon as you're done, documenting this, this really goes well with my favorite book on lean, 2-second lean. He says his primary suggestion in implementing lean is to take a video of your process before and after, so you can show people how much improvement there was. Yeah. Do y'all actually log video so you can actually see a video of how someone did it before and then show a video of how they do it after?
We do grab screenshots, and we try to minimize how many screenshots we grab. It helps us with our machine learning when we train our models to find processes being executed in the wild. But there's also, again, utility for the end user. And I think that's a great example of, like, here's where we started. And now, we've analyzed, we've measured, and we've made changes, and we're iteratively improving, in a lean style fashion to get better and better. But you got to know where you came from in order to measure your progress.
No, I'm excited, Jay. I think you're right, and I would agree with you, James, about this being or RPA being a bridge technology, and use the Excel macros example, right? And I think about like low code, no code platforms today, right? Much more robust than kind of an Excel macro. But hey, it's quick, it's convenient, it definitely works and has its place, right? And so I think, Jay, to your point, it's like, hey, this is a first step just to better understand your processes. I even think about systems that you're looking to retire and you want to know, does anything still use a system? Well, you've got lots of legacy systems in insurance, and that's always a question that we faced. It's like, hey, does anyone use this? Can we turn it off without any repercussions or not? And particularly, like you said, with the Great Resignation, as folks walk out the door, those might have been your subject matter experts that had that intel and could have told you. Now they don't, aren't at your company anymore. So how do you know, right? And so before you just kind of hope and pray, you turn it off and then see if anything breaks, right? This would be a great way to probably test that out as well.
So I'll close out with this. You've raised a few $1 million. One of the more recent announcements was on my birthday last year, July 7th, 2021. You raised $2 million. Before that, and that's when you actually came in from MVL to be the CEO. And the total raised, at least publicly, was $6.5 million, because you had a $4.5 million round in 2020, another $2 million in 2021. So you're at 6.5 now.
That's correct.
You got some backers like Zillow's CEO Spencer Raskoff. You got Blue Nile Wet Paint founder Ben Elowitz. So you've got some folks in on the money here. You were with a venture group, with Madrona Venture Group and their Venture Labs MVL. What's it looking like? I mean, the funding landscape's changing a little bit right now. Venture groups are telling their investments to conserve cash and to knuckle down.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on this phase of venture capital?
Well, I'm kind of an old dog. I've lived through a lot of these ups and downs. I still got scars from the .com bust.
All of us on this all have scar tissue from '99, by the way. So,
that one was quite spectacular. But throughout my startup career, I mean, you see these waves; they come and go. It's just part of the game of coping and adapting. And so we'll see. I'm optimistic at this point still that most of the impact we're seeing is with later stage companies and the sort of like near unicorns, that are sort of looking to IPO and they're certainly being hurt right now. But talk to me in a few weeks and there could be certainly some of this stuff falling downstream to the little guys like me. Definitely want to stay optimistic, but we'll do what we have to do to survive and have a lot of experience doing that. So it's just part of the journey. It's part of the game.
It is. It's all things, including the ocean, ebb and flow, and so you just got to learn how to float on top, no matter whether it's an ebb or a flow. It's the way it goes.
Totally.
This is a great conversation. I enjoyed the chat. I hope our listeners out there understand the differences between process mapping and process intelligence and RPA and RPAs. These are different spaces. This is a really weird but interesting hybrid between like a timekeeping productivity app and a process automation app, and it's you're sitting in the middle in a space that I didn't even know existed, which is I kind of feel like I'm spelunking today, and I just found a new cavern. It's exciting.
No, very exciting, and I think it's early days. We know that a lot of companies are really just embarking still on their digital transformation initiatives. I've had experience, guys with a lot of legacy, technologies in different industries, like travel, for example. Certainly heard a lot about those legacy systems in insurance and financial services and so forth. So, even though I tend to be more on the kind of cutting edge of doing new things and creating new spaces, I'm always very cognizant from my experience that there's a lot of bedrock out there, that still needs to be upended, and it takes time, and it can be incremental as well, and so again, that's just really kind of part of the journey of doing these kinds of things.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for the discussion, and I know Rob, you got a couple of news stories. What do you got this week?
Yeah, just I've got 3 items that I thought were interesting that caught my eye. The first is an old friend of mine, Marty Ellingsworth, wrote from Carrier Management, an article called "The Insurance Data War: The Insurance Data War: How Old and New School Can Live in Harmony." And he actually points out that there's a ton of actuaries out there that are still using Excel for their rating engines and things like that. And he's like, it's the tool that's commonly used to communicate with executive management and stuff like that. So trying to bridge that gap between kind of a telematics world and IoT world, et cetera, and squaring the circle on that one. So I thought it was thought provoking. Wanted to share that. The second one, we talked about Tesla. So Jay, you said you're a Tesla owner. I don't know if Tesla insurance is available yet in Washington State, but Elon Musk this week made some headlines that were not related to Twitter. He spoke to the attendees of the All-In Summit in Miami, where he talked about the car insurance industry is incredibly inefficient. And he said, you've got so many middle entities from the insurance agents all the way to the final reinsurer. There's like a half dozen companies each taking a cut. And they said that Tesla charges premiums based on real-time driving using, they calculate a monthly safety score And there are 5 factors that go into the score. Forward collision warnings per 1,000 miles, hard braking, aggressive turning, unsafe following, and forced autopilot disengagement. And these are very different from the traditional determinants like credit score and age. It sounds like when you sign up, you get a safety score of 90 to start, and then it can obviously go higher or lower, and your premium is adjusted accordingly. So, Jay, I don't know. Do you have Tesla insurance? Does that sound attractive to you?
It could be attractive, and I certainly believe Alon, breaking down the industry and the inefficiencies. I got to tell a really quick story about the Tesla score, though. So, I was a little bit bent out of shape that the self-driving stuff didn't work as expected, and so I went into a dealership and was complaining. And he said, well, there is a beta coming out that we're giving to special customers, who have a high score. What's your score? And I was like, I didn't know I had a score. And he said, do you have the Tesla app installed? I said, yeah. I handed him my phone. He brought up the Tesla app and showed me I had a score of 57. I burst out laughing when he showed it to me. My wife would have gotten a lot of pleasure out of seeing that score, because she always says I'm Mario Andretti, when it comes to driving. But, again, here's data. And I may not have completely agreed with, maybe how the scoring was done, but, I understood and thanked the gentleman and left.
Well, what's interesting is Tesla said in Texas, they're actually the second largest insurer of Tesla autos now already. And so obviously kind of has an embedded insurance play to it. So it's quite fascinating to follow Elon. Yeah. And then,
well, it's like embedded, and it's not as they just need to make it parametric, and then they'd have like the bifecta there. Right now, I think it's pretty traditional. It's embedded, but it's traditional insurance. I don't think they're selling by the mile, are they?
I don't believe so. No, it's the standard time-based coverage. So
yeah. Standard.
And then lastly, I'm a golf fan, and I don't know, Jay, if you're a golfer, James, but anyway, I spent this weekend watching the PGA Championship in Tulsa, which is very exciting, and was kind of, catching some of the summaries on Golf Digest, and stumbled across this. It was interesting. During the telecast, they actually advertised their jobs website for the PGA. I was like, I didn't know that they are like that hard up for jobs. And so anyway, this great article from Golf Digest called The Club Pro Crisis. And so we've been hearing about the Great Resignation. Well, it's also in golf, and many people think that being the club pro would be a dream job, right? You get to work on a golf course and be outside, but actually you have to deal with just as many emails and meetings as the typical office worker. Many of these guys work up to 80 hours a week. They may not get vacation time for much of the year. We may think of them as being out there giving instruction all day, every day, but that's actually a small part of their job, and people are leaving the industry in droves. And so very similar to others, and the article was saying that, hey, a lot of golf clubs, they need to rethink the position. They need to actually staff up. They need to cut back time. They need to give more defined responsibilities with some assistants and others, maybe separating out like the pro golf shop, right, and some of the items that they sell and the inventories from the teaching and lessons aspect or whatever. So anyway, the Great Resignation has come to golf pros as well. A very interesting article.
Yeah.
No. So I enjoy playing, and
I play too,
Jay, but that does not make me happy to hear.
I will pass the news on to my 19-year-old son, though, who's trying to get a job for this summer, and he's a big golfer. He's super into it, so I'll be sure to tell him that tonight.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks for that, Rob. Appreciate it. And, no thank you for that last news article. I don't want to hear about my pro leaving. But it's been a good show. Jay Bartot, really enjoyed talking to you.
Really
of course,
appreciate it.
You can go to their website. That would be ZeitWorks.com, I believe. Yeah. And you can go to ZeitWorks, ZeitWorks.com. Thanks, Jay, and thanks, Rob, for being on the show.
Thanks, gentlemen.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
This has been the Insurtech Geek podcast, powered by JB Knowledge. That's jbknowledge.com.
It's all about transforming and disrupting the insurance world. I've been your host, James Benham. That's jamesbenham.com with co-host Rob Galbraith. That's endofinsurance.com. Big thanks to Jim Greenlee, our podcast producer, Kara Dalton-Allero, our creative producer, and thank you for joining us today. We're taking you on a journey through insurance tech, so enjoy the ride and geek out. See you next time.